It's been 1 year since Stamford's 31st Mayor David Martin took office last December. We sat down with the mayor this week to recap the past year and talk about what's next. Here's part 2 of our 4-part interview. Switching gears a little bit, you talked about the fire consolidation, the overcrowding. Another thing you've been pushing for is street safety, the street safety initiative. So I just want to ask you, why was that so important for you to do, and some of the things you've done so far to initiate that?
Well, this really came from 3 different points of information or 3 different things that were happening. One, as I think you know, we started the Mayor's Night In, Mayor's Night Out, where citizens could come into the office and talk directly to the mayor for 5, 10, 15 minutes on occasion about particular issues that they were concerned about. And there's been a few people that have tried to really abuse that process, but by and large, it's had a huge turnout of people coming in, and in some cases we're able to solve the problems immediately. Some people bring in concerns that are beyond our immediate ability to help, but it's important to listen. And in that process, I would tell you that I think the most frequent complaints have something to do with traffic or parking or pedestrian safety. Point 1. Point 2 is my own observations. My own observations of the streets don't appear to be safe for bicyclists and pedestrians, and in fact, as a symbol and as my own commitment, I now have, or I shouldn't say I have, there is now a mayor's bicycle. And on occasion, I get on the bicycle because I'll go to a meeting in the downtown, and there aren't very many of us out that bike those streets, but I do it. I believe that's where the future lies, not just in Stamford, but in downtown urban areas across this country. But my own observation there, as well as from a traffic flow perspective. There was one Sunday, moderate traffic, but the traffic really wasn't holding it up. And I'm coming down Washington Boulevard, and I hit 5 stoplights in a row. I take a left onto Tresser, and I hit 5 more stoplights in a row. And the lights, I would tell you that they really aren't synchronized, and they haven't been synchronized for 15 years, and that's one of my objectives, to resynchronize, but it actually seems like they're synchronized against us sometimes if you hit 10 stoplights in a row and you can't go. So that's my observations. And finally, but the most compelling reason why I've given this a priority is that we've had 5 people, 5 fatalities on our streets. 3 pedestrians and a couple in an automobile accident, different causes, and in every case, it's, you know, the fault of some driver that made some egregious error, or, you know, a pedestrian was doing what they shouldn't be doing. But nonetheless, when you have the convergence of the fatalities to the complaints to my own observations, it's time to do something. And so I've made this a big priority, and that priority extends on, we call it the 3 E's. There's an education component, because actually injuries are happening across this country with an increasing number to primarily young people with cell phones in their hands as they walk across a street. And so pedestrian accidents are in fact rising a little bit because we not only have a distracted driver problem, we've got distracted pedestrian problems. And I want to get through the schools before our school children become vulnerable to that. So we've got an education component. We've got an enforcement component, which was a distracted driving ticketing campaign that happened in September for several days, and I think we issued somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 tickets for distracted driving, and there were a number for running red light or no turning when no turn on red was not allowed, and there were times at which the officers were backed up writing tickets. They, you know, there's only so many they can do. And we're going to be running a DUI enforcement during this holiday season. So to those who listen to this, enjoy the holiday season, but if there's drinking involved, enjoy it with a friend who's not drinking, because we're going to be out there and we're going to be pushing the distracted driving again. And finally, there's an engineering component. And the engineering component is, I think there's a number of places where we need to change our signs or our lights or our striping of the streets, And that's more immediate. In the longer term, deal with such as can we synchronize the lights? Some of the actions that have taken place so far is we've put flashers, strobe lights on what I call mid-block crosswalks. So you got a crosswalk in the middle of the street, and drivers are running those stoplights all the time. And of course, there's always a few bad people, but it's also an unexpected place for a stoplight. And we're hoping that that strobe will reattract the driver's attention from whatever it is else they're doing to see there's something oh, there's a yellow light there, there's a red light, and stop. And we're hoping there'll be fewer of those in the mid-block crosswalks. We've put up some backlit no right turn on red signs at some of our biggest intersections, most busy intersections where we've got long pedestrian crosswalks, and we've seemed to have had a lot of people violating those no right turns on red. This last couple of weeks we put up stanchions, very simple, low-tech. This is a pedestrian crosswalk. You put that up in the middle of the street, and we're getting some very positive feedback up on this. And I think there's going to be a lot more over time. The idea there is not just to draw attention to the sidewalk for the pedestrian, but it has an added benefit. I'm sure of it because I watch it happen. The cars slow down. You know, and this is something important. They begin to pay attention to what's on the road rather than looking at their cell phone or doing whatever, because there's something in the road that catches their attention. It's right where pedestrians normally walk, and I see the cars slowing down for that. So in terms of there are ways that we can encourage more orderly traffic, safer traffic. So we've got all these things underway, and last but not least is that I'm actually reorganizing the traffic engineering departments. Right now they are scattered into 3 different functional areas, and so there is no leader of a comprehensive transportation, traffic, and parking. And so we're in the process of doing a reorganization, creating a position of a bureau chief for transportation, traffic, and parking, which is of course going to deal with many of the issues I've talked about, but even in a larger scale, we've got a transportation center, and that falls in that broader spectrum of who's got responsibility of interfacing with the with the state for the transportation center, the railroad station, or for that matter, Connecticut Transit or any other transportation issues. So yes, it's very important for a lot of different reasons, for safety, for traffic flow, for just the enjoyment of the city. And I think we're trying to catch up to 20 years of slowly neglecting this, and I'm trying to turn it around.
I did want to ask you about the parking spaces as well too, in the garage in the government center. You've also made it a point to make the government center more accessible to the public. So I mean, why did you do that? Why was that important for you?
Well, actually, we talked before about the 2 big things that started even before I was mayor, but I had 3 which don't rise to that level of importance, but I actually had 3 other agenda items. One was, and it's, if you will, it's in the street smart, how do we make the street safer, was to get that railroad crossing over at Riverbend. And people had talked about it, and there was kind of a deal, and there wasn't a deal, and we made that a huge priority. I, in fact, spoke to the governor, and we spoke to the chief of staff, we spoke to the commissioner of transportation, we spoke to the state reps, and particularly Senator Leone, the now former Rep Jerry Fox, and the Rep William Tong, who all intersected into that area. And we got that done. We've now got a deal in place, and the city is, as part of putting a commitment in terms of, we're putting a couple $100,000 into modernizing a light at that location. But that drop arm, where we've had several serious accidents over the years, and I'm concerned that it could be worse, that's going to be solved. And the parts are already on order. And hopefully Metro North, who I think actually has to construct the work, will get that done within the next year. So that was one of the 3. Second one, I wanted the DMV back. And I met with the governor and said, years ago we had a DMV and we lost it for reasons that I didn't fully appreciate it, but I said, there's lots of people down in this part of the world that it's just inefficient and time-consuming to go all the way to the Norwalk DMV, and we should have a substation back. And lo and behold, we have a substation back. And when we were cutting the ribbon, there were people already coming in on the very first day, at the very first moment that the session was open. I haven't been there since, but it was the second thing that I wouldn't put up at the same level, but something I'm proud of. And the third was to change that garage in the government center, which is what you brought up. And it seemed wrong to me that in a government center that is here for the people of Stamford, that you should have 22, 24 spaces reserved for public officials that are all right next to the door, forcing the public, for which this building is there, to walk further. And worse than that, those public officials didn't many times there'd be empty spaces. I mean, they weren't always there. So we've got empty spaces reserved next to the door, and the public's forced to park far away. That's just not the way you ought to do business. And so I moved all of those up to the second floor, and that's partly a symbol of the people of Stamford come first, and it's partly just smarter parking management. And we've done some other things in the garage, and so when I started, you could rarely find a space on that first floor. And we had visitors and citizens driving around that first floor looking for parking spaces, or driving up to the fourth floor. If you go there now, on most days, you'll be able to find a parking space on that first floor. And I think a large part of that is because we've got 22 reserved spots moved away and moved up to actually we reduced the number of reserved spots as well. I think we had 22 or 24, and I think we've dropped down to 14 or something like that. I just think that's a smarter way to run government, and I think it's a symbol of who comes first. And I included moving my own vehicle out of there. And it hasn't proved to be that much of an inconvenience.